In addition, he kept a sharp image in his memory of each of the many people whom he had met in his active life. He knew and understood their needs, and that was already a comfort. At the great entrance with the gifts he began again, with the commemorations that had been sent inside to him in the meantime, so that the choir sometimes had to repeat the Cherubicon 3 times. After the Divine Liturgy he was still for hours in the church. With minute care he cleansed the chalice and discos, the table of preparation and the altar. At the same time he ate some prosphora and drank much hot water. He did the different hours of prayer aloud, wherever he happened to be, often standing in the train or on a ship, in between the other passengers, for he traveled much. He read the morning mail in the afternoon, after the Divine Liturgy, but a trusted person had to open his letters in order to see whether there were any urgent intentions. Sometimes he gave announcements of the contents beforehand, even of affairs about which he had heard nothing for a long time. He took strict care that in church, and especially in the altar, nothing was said about anything else than what related to the service. His attention went out in the first place to the sick and the lonely, whom he visited even in the remotest places. For this, he carried on a strap around his neck a flat leather case with a heavy icon of the Mother of God, a copy of the wonder-working icon of Kursk, which the emigrant church had brought with it out of Russia. There he sang with his broken voice at the sick man's side the little office of the Mother of God, Maleben, and eventually brought the Holy Communion as well. His preference went for children, whom he so readily had around him. He always informed himself about them. He catechized them, sent them cards, and brought presents for them with him. He could look at them in their eyes for minutes at a time with that warm, radiant look, which encompassed you completely, as a mother puts her arms around her baby. This look is something unforgettable for everyone who came in contact with him. As badly as he could express himself in words, so were his eyes full of meaning. A chance bodily contact made one think of something hard and massive, like a knotty tree trunk. But if he looked at you, then you knew yourself for that moment to be the most loved person in the world. Naturally, many who only knew him superficially were offended at his appearance. He knew no way of outward worthiness. He was under all circumstances only himself, the monk who thought only of prayer and the needs of those in trouble. But much greater is the number of those who admired him indeed for that and loved him, even though he was tiresome to them with his requests. The story is famous of how he stayed in Washington for many days in succession in the waiting room of the Ministry of External Affairs until he extracted the entry permit for his thousands of Russian refugees from China, including the sick, which no one had managed to do previously. Everywhere he went, people appeared who wanted to speak with him. If he walked in Paris, then people hurried to him from all sides to ask his blessing and to kiss his hand. Then you saw the elegantly dressed ladies often first wiping their mouths clean because they knew that he had a dislike for lipstick. In addition, the train to Dieppe, where the Cadet Corps had later been housed, left too late from the Gare Saint-Lazare on many occasions, because the conductor saw from afar the Russian Monsignor, who was held up by people every time. Nevertheless, he also often missed trains on his journey, for time was for him but a vague concept. There would be many other such anecdotes to tell. There is, for example, that tramp in Lyon, who so enthusiastically told how Vladika John used to walk through Shanghai at night during the difficult years in order to give out bread and money, even to drunkards, that he had never forgotten, with however much bitter criticism he spoke about the others. In the same way as he lived, he has also died, completely unexpectedly, alone in his room, when he had just gone to sit down in order to rest after the church service during his visit to Seattle, in the far north of his extensive diocese. We shall always be grateful for having known him and for having been taken up into his wide love. We trust that his bond of love will still work continuously for our good, now that he is yet more directly linked with his Lord, of whom he had been one of the most faithful servants on earth in our time. Chapter 9. The Death of a Saint. Eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man, the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. 1 Corinthians 2:9. The unutterable joy and glory of the kingdom of heaven, the goal of the Christian life, is partly glimpsed even on earth by those who live the life of grace in the Church of Christ. The vision of heaven is normally clearest, and the life of grace most intensely felt on the radiant feast of the resurrection of Christ, with devout reception of Holy Communion. Yet there are times when God grants a special grace to his people, as for instance in connection with a wonder-working icon of the Most Holy Mother of God, or with one of his chosen saints. As those who were present and participated will readily testify, such a special grace was revealed in connection with the recent repose and burial of Archbishop John Maximovitch of San Francisco and Western America, of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. Everything connected with these events was extraordinary. First of all, the death itself was extraordinary. It occurred in Seattle, where His Eminence had gone for a few days, accompanying the miraculous cursed icon of the Mother of God. At 3:50 p.m. on Saturday, July 2nd, June 19th, Old Style, the death was sudden, yet on this day, after celebrating the Divine Liturgy, the Archbishop had spent 3 hours in the altar praying, which was rare even for this man of prayer, and in fact had only shortly before left the church to rest for a few minutes in his room next door when the fatal seizure occurred. Those who ran to his room when they heard him fall report that he died immediately thereafter, peacefully and without pain. These circumstances, together with statements which he had made beforehand, one of them the day before he left for Seattle, make it quite clear that he knew in advance of his approaching death and had prepared himself for it, even as have the great saints throughout the history of the Church of Christ. Scarcely 24 hours later, the body arrived in the San Francisco Cathedral, which he himself had completed. The body was met by the cathedral clergy, as it had been when the Archbishop was alive, and there began a vigil that was to last for just over 4 days. Every day after the morning and evening services, a solemn panikhida was served, and the rest of the day until midnight, the Gospel was read uninterruptedly by the diocesan clergy. After midnight, there was a touching scene. The servers and readers of the cathedral read the Psalter the whole night, and so the Archbishop was surrounded in death by the young people whom he loved so much, keeping a last vigil with him. This whole time there was a constant procession of people come to bid farewell to their beloved Archpastor. At each service before the open coffin, a sermon by one of the attending hierarchs, often spiritual instruction to the large crowd attending. On Sunday, July 3rd, Bishop Nectari of Seattle, vicar of the Archdiocese, invited all to kiss the relics of the Archbishop. This term, properly applied to the body of a deceased hierarch, was understood by all to have a more specific application to the body of a saint. On July 4th, Bishop Sava of Edmonton called the Archbishop blessed, and more boldly yet, a wonder-worker in his own lifetime, and disclosed that he himself already prayed to him as to a saint. On July 6th, Archbishop Averki of Holy Trinity Monastery spoke of the Archbishop's ascetic life, and especially of his extraordinary battle with sleep, which had caused him never once to lie down in all his 40 years as a monk, but only to take an hour or two of rest nightly in an uncomfortable position, either sitting up or bent over on the floor praying before icons, a marvel in an age of general spiritual decline. Fittingly, the Archbishop also died in a sitting position, and in fact had expressed the desire to be buried in this position, as were Byzantine hierarchs, but unfortunately this could not be done. On July 7th, Metropolitan Filaret, just arrived from New York, noted the Archbishop's authentic Christian asceticism and cited him as an example of true ascetic steadfastness and strictness, unheard of in these evil days. From the first day of the vigil, it was apparent that this was to be no ordinary farewell to the departed, not even for a hierarch. There was a sense of being present at the unfolding of a mystery, the mystery of holiness. Those present were devoutly convinced that they had come to bury a saint. In all these days there was an extraordinary outpouring of love. Everyone suddenly discovered himself an orphan, for to each the Archbishop had been the one person most near, most understanding, most loving. Hardened enemies, and there were much, came to beg forgiveness in death of a man who had held no ill will for them while living. The vigil was climaxed by the funeral service itself, which was held at 5:30 p.m. on Thursday, July 7th. June 24th, Old Style. There were present some 5 hierarchs, in addition to those mentioned above. There was Archbishop Leonti of Santiago, Chile, 24 priests, innumerable servers, and over 1,500 faithful, who overflowed the large cathedral, and whose number did not diminish for 6 hours. The fervor of those who attended the long service which the Church of Christ appoints at the repose of her hierarchs has probably been rarely equaled in this century. It could best be compared with the fervor that is sometimes manifested at the services of Passion Week and Pascha, and the feeling was indeed similar. With sorrow at the passing of this man of God, who had been a loving father to a flock of unnumbered thousands in China, in Europe, and throughout the world, was mingled an anticipation of joy at the gaining of something even greater, a heavenly intercessor. As many, perhaps, as prayed for the repose of his soul had already begun to pray directly to him, that he might continue, now in this heavenly abode, his fatherly protection of them. Those who had been closest to him put icons, crosses, flowers, even infants, and several hierarchs their panagias into the coffin, in order to receive them back after contact with the holy body, which even in its 6th day of exposure, without embalming, showed no signs of decay. How appropriate it was that the cathedral in which he should end his lifelong service to the Church of Christ, and in which he was to find his final resting place, should be dedicated to the joy of all who sorrow. The funeral service was followed by the final kissing of the relics by all present, and a procession 3 times around the cathedral, the bier being carried by the orphans whom the Archbishop had rescued and raised in Shanghai. This was the culminating point of these solemn days, and it was a veritable triumphal procession. It was as if one were attending no longer the funeral of a deceased hierarch, but the uncovering of the holy relics of a newly proclaimed saint. One of the attending hierarchs noted the similarity to the procession with the shroud of the Lord on the eve of Passion Saturday. The body was interred in a small basement chapel under the altar, the last eternal memory being sung only after 1 a.m. Within 4 days, in an unprecedented action, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors amended the city law to permit the burial of prelates in their cathedrals, and the resting place of the Archbishop became final. Bishop Ignati Brianchaninov, in his Thoughts on Death, has written, "Have you ever seen the body of a righteous man whose soul has departed? There is no stench from him. One does not fear to approach him. At his burial, sorrow is dissolved in a kind of incomprehensible joy, and this, according to Bishop Ignati, is a sign that the deceased has obtained mercy and grace with the Lord." All of this was felt by those who devoutly accompanied Archbishop John to his final repose. But now, when this event and experience of a lifetime had been described, the story of Archbishop John has not even begun to be told. He has already been glorified in the hearts and prayers of those who knew him, and there is daily pilgrimage to his tomb. The faithful were several times reminded during these days of the promise which Saint Seraphim of Sarov made before his death, to hear the prayers of those who would come to his grave and speak to him, as if to a living person, of their needs and sorrows, and they were encouraged to do the same at the tomb of Archbishop John. From the time of the burial service, not a day has passed but that some of the Archbishop's spiritual children have come to speak to Vladika, to hear the psalter that is constantly open before his grave, and to seek his intercession. And if the life of this righteous man was truly pleasing to God, as we cannot but believe that it was, his remembrance will not be merely local. He was, as one of the priests closest to him called him, an ascetic saint of universal significance, for truly his life was the phenomenon of our times, the life of one who was in effect a pillar saint, who yet lived in the midst of the world and was accessible to all, and through whose prayers miracles were performed. To those who have experienced these days, nearness to a saint has brought understanding of and re-inspired devotion to the saints of God, whom our beloved Vladika himself so greatly venerated. It is they who offer the proof and the example of a life devoted entirely to God. In an age when coldness and carelessness are causing even Orthodox Christians to lose the savor of genuine Christianity, the death of a saint was a sign and a revelation from above, renewing in us that contact with the heavenly realms without which there is no spiritual life. Eugene Rose, 1966. Chapter 10. The Sepulchre. Goldrush fever caused the transformation of a small Roman Catholic missionary outpost into a large city, San Francisco. That spirit of burning passion has never left San Francisco. The spirit of this world has had full sway over it, making it the country's most alluring city, promising worldly pleasures. But likewise, ever since the purchase of Alaska by the United States, San Francisco was also the country's first Orthodox church center and the see of the first Orthodox missionary diocese, whose bishops, with their true pastoral character and their holy deeds of sowing Christ's seed, have become living illustrations of St. Paul's words, "But where sin abounded, grace did much more abound." Romans 5:20. Today, a century later, these words have become even more applicable. Apart from old vices, within the city, satanic services are now openly conducted, and a generation of his servants is being cultivated. But again, the grace of God is sent in such measure to no other city but this one, for here lived a true vessel of the Holy Spirit in the form of a frail and unattractive little man, Archbishop John Maximovitch, who spent his last years in San Francisco, and whose relics are enshrined in a sepulchre under the majestic cathedral which he completed in this city. During his lifetime, Archbishop John was regarded as a saint. Many people sent requests for his prayers from all over the world, and many testified to obvious miraculous help. After his death, his sepulchre became indeed a holy place. Thousands of people visited annually. By mail, many request that prayers be said before his tomb. People send for the ends of candles burned before the tomb for them, and also for drops of oil from the vigil lamp burning there. Every year on the anniversary of Vladika's death, June 19th, July 2nd, the Divine Liturgy is served in the sepulchre. Then, despite the early hour, about dawn, the sepulchre is overflowing with the faithful, and virtually all receive Holy Communion. The cathedral, with its 5 golden domes, is dedicated to the miracle-working icon of the Mother of God, the joy of all who sorrow. It is located on Geary Boulevard between 26th and 27th Avenues, and is a dominating feature of the northwest part of San Francisco, being visible from many parts of town, as well as to travelers approaching by ocean or over the Golden Gate Bridge. The sepulchre is 2 stories down under the altar. Its walls are adorned with frescoes, done in 1967 by the noted icon painter Pimen Sofronov, who was the first to bring the great iconographic tradition to the New World. Once you have descended to the lowest basement level, you enter a fairly spacious chapel with a low frescoed ceiling and walls and a glittering marble floor. In the center, surrounded by a myriad of flickering candles, is the sarcophagus, covered by Archbishop John's mantia. At the head of the sarcophagus rests Vladika's mitre, on both sides of which are the pontifical Dekyrion and Trikyrion, 2 and 3 branched candlesticks for blessing, and above them a Ripidion fan on either side, held over holy objects during services. His archpastoral staff is attached near the foot of the sarcophagus, and at this end is an analoy where the Psalter is read for the repose of Vladika's soul. On an analoy at the other end of the sarcophagus is the chapel's main icon, brought from China, the entrance of the Theotokos into the temple. The frescoes painted by Pimen Sofronov include one on the ceiling, Christ Pantocrator, in a circle over the sarcophagus. On the walls at the sides of the sarcophagus, the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ. On the south wall, directly opposite the entrance, the protection of the Theotokos, with angels on either side. Next to this, on the east wall, the angel of the Lord announcing the resurrection of Christ to the Mother of God, and the myrrh-bearing women. And on the west wall, the Archangel Michael, who was Vladika's patron saint before he became a monk. Between these large icons are several saints shown in half stature and ovals. St. John of Tobolsk, Vladika's patron saint, Saints Boris and Glafira, in memory of Vladika's parents, Saint Sergius for an uncle, and Saint Natalia for his godmother. Here, several nights a week, panikidas are served by local clergy. The oil vigil lamp on the sarcophagus burns unceasingly. The sepulchre is visited frequently, especially by those in various afflictions. They come there to pray for the righteous soul of their beloved archpastor and ask for his intercession before God. They come with childlike faith just to complain of their heartfelt sorrows and misfortunes, and Vladika hears them and grants them help. In Holy Russia, whence he came, and whose saints he emulated, in places like this records were kept in special books of testimony of heavenly help, granted after prayer with faith to a saint. Several such testimonies recording Archbishop John's acts of intercession at his sepulchre are given at the beginning of Part 3 of this book. May they strengthen the faith of those who are too far away to visit this holy place in person. Part 2 and Part 3, a record book of Blessed John's intercessions. Editor's Preface. In continuing the collection of materials which was begun for the chronicle of the veneration of Blessed John, the St. Herman of Alaska Brotherhood has received a number of communications from people of various nationalities, many of whom never knew Blessed John personally. Their accounts reveal the ever-increasing veneration of this great wonder-worker of our times, and also testify to his powerful intercession for those in need. One of the most touching and impressive aspects of Blessed John is, quite simply, his continued presence among us. It is quite obvious, as one hierarch stated on the very day of Blessed John's funeral, that he is not dead but alive, and in many ways he reveals himself to those who believe in his sanctity. Many of the following testimonies recount stunning miracles which Blessed John performed both during his life and after his repose. Others record relatively small indications that believing people are calling upon him as a living saint, and that he is answering them, visiting them, appearing to them, and inspiring them in the humble and sober path of true orthodoxy. Taken together, these testimonies form a vivid and compelling picture of Orthodox sanctity. It is a picture viewed from all sides, through the eyes of a people of diverse backgrounds, who in simplicity of heart cannot conceal their love and gratitude to Blessed John. The editors have developed a close contact with the witnesses, and thus take full responsibility for the truthfulness of their testimonies. The first 7 testimonies were collected by the St. Herman Brotherhood within a few years after Blessed John's repose, and record miracles which occurred in connection with his sepulchre. The miracle recounted in testimony number 8 happened to a family on its way home from the sepulchre. Numbers 9 through 16 were taken from the last chapter of the Russian language chronicle by Bishop Sava, St. Herman Brotherhood 1976, which was published in commemoration of the 10th anniversary of Blessed John's repose. In numbers 17 through 100 are included other testimonies gathered by the Brotherhood over the years, many of which have appeared in the pages of the Orthodox Word. At the time of this writing, miracles steadily continue to be reported. Before the 20th anniversary of Blessed John's repose, the Brotherhood sent out the first 33 testimonies as a catalogue of miracles to Orthodox hierarchs, clergy, and lay people in order to encourage his formal glorification by each local Orthodox church. This catalogue was distributed together with a report for canonization, which urged the faithful to send petitions for Blessed John's canonization to Orthodox bishops. The accounts which follow represent the voice of the people proclaiming the full significance of a contemporary God-bearer to a spiritually impoverished world. They bear witness to the closeness of God, to the abundant grace that he sheds on poor human sufferers, as a sign of how dear the righteous exploits of the saints are to him, as in ancient times, so in our modern post-Christian era. 1. Deliverance from blindness. A young registered nurse living in San Francisco and working in one of the municipal hospitals suddenly became blind in one eye. It became evident absolutely unexpectedly while at work when she had to give a patient a prescription. She looked at the label and saw nothing. Horror struck her. The doctors diagnosed that due to an inflammation of the optic nerve, one of her eyes was already totally blind and had become dead and needed to be removed in order to save the other one. With this, of course, her medical career was abruptly to come to an end. She had known Archbishop John while yet in her childhood in the Far East, and somewhere in Europe as well, and knew from her parents who revered him about his miracles, but he was dead long ago. In absolute despair, she rushed to his sepulchre as to a last hope and prayed with tears for a long time on his grave. She began to come frequently to the cathedral, praying before all the holy objects, and then would descend to the sepulchre and pray there for a long time on his coffin, so that others began to take notice of her. At work, meanwhile, she tried to conceal her misfortune, not knowing what to do. Thus passed several days. Then one night she was seized with total despair, and she devoted herself to flaming morning prayer, after which she opened at random the Holy Gospel and read the following. As Jesus passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth, and his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, Neither hath this man sinned, nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. When he had thus spoken, he spat on the ground, and made clay of the spittle. And he anointed the eyes of the blind man with this clay, and said unto him, Go, wash in the pool of Siloam, which is by interpretation sent. He went his way therefore, and washed, and came seeing. John 9:1-7. O Lord, she exclaimed, having read to the end with awe this passage that by chance appeared before her, if only I could get to the Holy Land and wash my eyes in the pool of Siloam, or at least get even a drop of this water, I will see anew. Early in the morning she went again to the sepulchre of Blessed John, and again prayed fervently there. Then a little thin old woman, unknown to her, approached, and said that she had recently visited the Holy Land, and had brought some holy water from the pool of Siloam, and that she will bring the next day a little bottle with her, since the divine liturgy will be celebrated in the sepulchre, and the Metropolitan himself will serve. From these words of Grandma Elizabeth, who of course did not know anything about her prayer the night previous, the afflicted girl was amazed, and early in the morning she was in the sepulchre before dawn. During the liturgy she received Holy Communion, and kneeling over the coffin of Blessed John, she applied the holy water to her ailing eyes. At once she felt better. The next day she already could see with the eye that was considered dead. News about this miracle quickly began to be published, and when it reached us, we met her and asked her to visit the bookshop of Blessed Herman of Alaska, and to tell us everything in detail. When on the appointed day she came and told us all the above, she then added that she had been confused, since she prayed not only to Blessed John, but to a whole number of saints, whom she venerated, in the cathedral in front of their holy icons, Saints Tikhon of Zadonsk, Nicholas, Seraphim, and others, begging him to help her. And now, even last night, she continued, I was wavering about coming to you. At night I saw a dream as if I was descending into some dark cellar with one window, while a lot of people are going there for some purpose, and I also had to go there for something, and with effort managed to push myself in. Then I see it is Archbishop John's sepulchre, but everything looks different, and there in the center is Blessed John in his mantle, alive. Others were placing sick people on him to be healed. Then I see they are placing an apparently dead woman on him, and she slowly begins to move, becomes well, and gets up by herself. Others are waiting for their turn. Whatever this might mean, I decided to come to you and tell you how everything was. All this took place at a time when the enemies of Blessed John, though they became a little more quiet, nevertheless continued confusing people, and thereby have considerably diminished faith in the righteous one. And Jesus said, For judgment I am come into this world, that they which see not might see, and that they which see might be made blind. John 9:39, September 1968, Reader Eugene Rose, Blessed Herman of Alaska Brotherhood, San Francisco, California. 2. Deliverance from certain death. I give witness concerning the miraculous healing of my brother, Vadim Vasilyevich Kozachenko, by the prayers of our dear Vladika John. This occurred after Vladika's death, when he was reposing in his sepulchre, but he heard us and helped us as if alive. One would like to talk a lot about Vladika. Many times while he was alive, in Shanghai and in Europe, Vladika miraculously healed the sick. In my own life, the healing of Vadim is already the second miracle from Vladika. The first miracle was in 1952. I was in England, where my son Philip was born. From his birth, Philip was very unhealthy, and on August 19th, he became quite seriously ill. I wrote Vladika in Brussels. I received a letter from him and a leaf from a tree under which Jesus Christ had prayed, and I placed this letter under the child's pillow. He began to get better. It was notable that he became better on the very day when Vladika received my letter. With Vadim, this all occurred very unexpectedly. On Wednesday, March 15, 1967, my brother's wife Nadia phoned me and said that my brother was dying. According to her words, the doctor said Vadim would not live until the following Monday. Prepare mother and come to say farewell and bury him. We did not know that he had been so seriously ill, because 2 weeks before this I had spoken with him on the telephone, and he had assured me that he was completely well. On the next day we went to San Francisco. When we saw Vadim, we were horrified. His face was the color of tobacco. The whites of his eyes were bright yellow. He was thin, with a swollen stomach and swollen feet. Whether he recognized us or not, I don't know. I remember that everything was indifferent to him. It was difficult to believe that the doctor had sent such a dying person home. I personally called his doctor, but I could not find out anything except that if he should live until Monday, he would make some kind of examination and tests. But he was very dubious that this would be necessary. He had only one hope, the Lord and the prayers of our holy Vladika. On the same evening, he phoned Father Konstantin Zanevsky and asked him to come on Friday and give communion to Vadim. Nadia and I went to church and to the sepulchre of Vladika John. After the first prayer at the tomb of Vladika, the hope was aroused that Vladika would help us. Nadia felt this hope the same as I did. On Friday, Vadim became worse. Father Constantine came and gave him communion. He confessed consciously, but then again fell into unconsciousness. All our thoughts were in the prayer, "Dear Vladika, instruct and help us to do what is necessary to help Vadim. Do not leave us, dear Vladika. By your holy prayers, intercede for us and help us." Suddenly, the thought came to me to take Vadim to the Veterans Hospital. It was as though some kind of power was pushing for us. Quickly, quickly, take him to Fort Miley. Again I phoned the doctor. He almost laughed that we wanted to do this. There was no hope. Why should we bother him and take him from one place to another? Despite these refusals by the doctor, we went to church, prayed, and decided to prepare the papers to take him to Fort Miley. Nadia and I were in a terrible state, but there was a firm faith and hope that Vladika would help. Later in the evening, Vadim became quite bad. He was lying unconscious, his temperature had risen, and we thought that he had pneumonia. We gathered to take him to Fort Miley, but he, recovering consciousness, begged us to take him to a private hospital, Mount Zion, and not change his doctor. Nadia and I could not decide what to do. We both wanted to take him to the Veterans Hospital at Fort Miley. We promised Vadim to leave him in the private hospital. Again we prayed to Vladika, "Help us, dear Vladika, instruct us and help us." Here Leonid Mikhailovich Subrilin came to the house and insisted on taking Vadim to the Veterans Hospital. His advice and that of my husband Rostislav were like an answer to our prayers to Vladika. Despite all the arguments of the doctor, we called an ambulance and took Vadim, who is now totally unconscious, to the Veterans Hospital. There, towards evening, we found out that when Vadim had been taken to the Veterans Hospital, he already had 4 diseases: cirrhosis of the liver, an overflow of bile, internal bleeding, and pneumonia. The doctor told us that Vadim was very seriously ill and that from the medical point of view there was no hope, but if we had faith then we should pray, because only a miracle could save him. Vadim became yet worse. He was brought into the critical ward. He opened his eyes rarely. Sometimes he was aware and would joke, but most of all he would be delirious. On Sunday after the liturgy we had a panikhida served in the sepulchre. On this day we became acquainted with Father Mitrophon, who often served in the sepulchre, and received a blessing from Bishop Nectari to give unction to Vadim. News of Vadim's illness quickly spread not only in the city, but in other cities and states. Everyone was praying to our dear Vladika John. Father Mitrophon did not stop praying for Vadim. Nadia and I knew only 2 paths, from home to church and from church to the hospital. But despite the fact that Vadim was very ill, our faith was growing stronger and stronger that Vladika John would save Vadim for us by his prayers. Only a short time before this, Vadim had told me that when he was very ill, he had often seen Vladika John and our reposed father, sometimes in a dream and sometimes when awake. He was already dying and heard some kind of special singing and music, of which he spoke in his delirium. After receiving unction, Vadim became better and recognized his family. Father Mitrophon gave communion to Vadim again in the hospital. A week went by. His heart became better. This might drag on and continue. The doctor advised me to return home to Reading. After we returned, 3 times more we were called, and each time, according to the words of the doctor, the end was at hand. He could not hold out long. The last time they had already prepared a shirt and suit for Vadim's burial, and they had already agreed what kind of coffin to buy and where to bury him. All this was done somehow mechanically, and then a strange thing happened. We were standing in despair at the tomb of Vladika, and I was mentally speaking with Vladika. Dear Vladika, if this is the holy will of the Lord, help us to bear this difficult loss. Help Nadia with her 2 small children and my mother. Do not leave us. Help us. I had given myself entirely over to these thoughts, and as if in reply, Vladika said to me, "Are you doubting in God's mercy? Why do you not believe God? That's not the way I taught you." I was ashamed for my doubts, but also joyful, because I felt that Vladika had heard our prayers. Next to me at this time stood Olga Nikolaevna Zubrilina. She was likewise praying for Vadim. I turned to her, and already with joyful tears I told her what had gone on in my mind. She told me, "Velechka, our Vladika is a saint. He has heard our prayers. Believe me, dear one, Vadim will get better." From this day on, there were no more doubts. Vadim would get better, although the doctors continued to assure us that there was no hope, and only a miracle would save him. Yes, we know, but we believe in miracles, and by a miracle of our Vladika, Vadim would become well. After this, Vadim became very ill twice more. Again he was placed in the ward for the critically ill. Nadia phoned me and said that the doctor was absolutely trying to persuade her to go straight to the morgue and begin preparations for the burial. But at this time she had such faith in his recovery that she advised us not to come, saying that she did not believe the doctor. I immediately phoned the Zubrilins and asked them to go to Father Mitrofan so that he might give communion to Vadim once more. When Father Mitrofan came to the hospital, the doctor said that they were expecting his death any minute. Glory be to God, by the prayers of Vladika John, death passed by, and from that day Vadim began to get better. Soon Pascha came, and it was a joyful one. Vadim was terribly thin. He was only skin and bones, and had grown much older, but still he looked better. He was allowed then to eat everything. He began to speak sensibly, and then did he begin to understand what had happened to him. The physicians were astonished. How could such a sick man get better? After all, for a whole month he had lain unconscious. Although there had been moments when he did recognize things. His wife had been called 4 times from work because death was near. Truly this was a miracle. The physicians said, "We did what we could, but it was God who has given you life." He got better all the time. His liver was totally restored, and he was recovering quickly. At the beginning of June, the day finally came when the physicians decided to let him go home. He was placed on a very strict diet. The doctors told his wife that he would never be able to work again. Despite the fact that he had gotten better, his stomach was still very swollen. There was much water, and therefore the danger had not passed away, and the illness might return, or he might get sick to death again. Nadia, I, and all the other members of the family did not worry very much over this, because we believed that everything would be all right. Days, weeks, and months passed by, and his stomach was still swollen, and there were no signs that it would go down. Returning home to Reading from one of my trips, I was very much suffering for Nadia, for I had noticed that she had begun to become discouraged. As always, my thoughts went to Vladika John. Before my return to Reading, I had gone to the cathedral to pray at Vladika's tomb. I so much wanted to see him, to hear his voice, to speak with him, at home on this very evening. My thoughts again returned to my sick brother. I remembered Shanghai, and how in difficult moments I would run to the cathedral to Vladika to share with him my sorrows or my joy. If you were with us, dear Vladika, I thought, if you would place your hands on his sick body, I believe that you would get rid of this swelling and this water, just as our Lord Jesus Christ banished the unclean spirits. And here I say this honestly with my whole soul and heart. I do not know whether I fell asleep or was half awake. I saw Vladika John come into my bedroom dressed in a gray cassock with a black belt. He had his prayer rope in his hand, and on his head a small kamilavka. Entering the room, he turned to me and said, "Well, what kind of misfortune do you have now that you are grieving so?" From my childhood, Vladika always had a mocking tone with me, as a grown-up would have with children. So it was now, but his eyes were full of love, and there was a smile on his lips. Here we were both near the bed on which the sleeping Vadim was lying. He went up to the bed, and not looking at me, he asked, "What's wrong here?" I told Vladika that Vadim had a swollen stomach and that there was much liquid in his stomach, and began to explain to him, saying, "If you would place your hands on Vadim, I know that you would deliver him from swelling and liquid and all the other filth he has in his organism." Vladika bent down over Vadim, placed his hands on his shoulders, and began to pray. I felt that there was no need for me to say any more. Vladika prayed. I know that my eyes followed every one of his movements. Vadim lay on his back, his hands stretched out at his sides. Vladika, with his hands encircled, and moved down his body as if he were chasing out all the filth and impurity, all the poison, not only from his stomach, but from his whole body. With each movement, I felt that I was witnessing a miracle, that from this moment Vadim would begin to get well. Vladika finished, took his hands from the feet of Vadim, straightened himself out, and then vanished. I did not manage to say a word to express to him my gratitude. Vladika was no longer there. I wished to run after him, and at this moment I saw that I was in my own room in Reading. I got up from my bed and put out the light. I stood on my knees and prayed with tears of gratitude to the Lord God, and thanked our dear intercessor and man of prayer. In my soul was peace and tender feeling. When I phoned Nadia, she informed me that they had noticed a change. That is, Vadim's stomach had become smaller. Gradually it began to go down. The physicians were very much encouraged, and again repeated, "A miracle, a miracle." With every day Vadim became stronger and better. The day finally came when he was allowed to eat everything he wanted, just a little at a time, then normally. He grew strong. His appetite was good. The swelling and liquid went away as if they had never been. They took Vadim off his medicines and allowed him to return to work. Nadia and Vadim had a panikida served at Vladika's tomb, and likewise a Malaban of thanksgiving. Then they went to the hospital to thank all the physicians who had treated him. All of them, as one told him, "Don't thank us, someone up there loves you very much." Yes, I know that our dear Vladika loves and protects us. As always, he has protected all of his spiritual children. All of the people mentioned here are ready to affirm the truth of the description of this miracle by the prayers of Archbishop John. Valentina V. Harvey, October 10th, 1968, Redding, California. 3. Miraculous preservation in Vietnam. He who at least once visited Archbishop John's sepulchre could not but notice and venerate a rather large, beautiful icon of the entrance of the Most Holy Mother of God into the temple, which is placed at the head of the coffin of Blessed John on an aneloy in the very center of the sepulchre. This icon in recent times was miraculously renewed in one pious Orthodox family. It was donated for the sepulchre of Blessed John in gratitude for his benefactions towards that family, as well as for all who were burdened with sufferings. Its owner, Ludmila Leonidovna Holtz, lives in the city of San Francisco and deeply venerates Blessed John still from the time she was in the Far East. Together with her mother, she donated this holy object after a vow given to God. When Archbishop John died, they wanted very much that he would be left under the cathedral. They had heard that the church authorities wanted to take him away, and so they gave a vow to give to Blessed John for his sepulchre their treasure, this icon, which they did. Having married an American, they came to this country, where they had a son born to them, John. When he grew up, he was drafted into the army. At that time, the Vietnam War was raging. He also had a deep veneration for Blessed John. But when he went to Vietnam, the blessed man was already not among the living. Not long before his departure, he came to the sepulchre and placed a photograph of Blessed John under his mitre, which is kept right on the sarcophagus of the Righteous One, with the intent of taking it back just before his departure for war, as a blessing from the Holy One. When he came back, he prayed at the coffin, took out the portrait, and placed it in the pocket of his uniform, right over his heart, as a protection against the enemy's bullet. And with this he left for the front. Here is what his mother witnesses. Judging from his many letters from overseas, how our Lord, thanks to the prayers of Blessed John, preserved him from various dangers in a truly miraculous way. The bishop's portrait was constantly and without fail in the pocket near his heart, day and night, always. Being in the rank of corporal, John experienced a whole series of obvious miracles, when all around him would fall dead or mortally wounded, and he alone would remain unharmed. Once their squad was ambushed, and he alone was neither killed nor wounded, while all others were either killed or taken captive. Another time a bomb hit their barracks, and those who stood right next to him were seriously injured. Neither was he harmed when he fell into an enemy trap, although he had to wrestle with the Viet Cong, and even received a minor wound. Having completed his assignment on the front line and being transferred to another mission, he met his happy parents at a Hawaii airport. Only then did he fully realize how well he had been guarded and protected by the prayers and portrait of Blessed John. In life, nothing occurs by chance. The holy icon of the entry of the Most Holy Theotokos into the temple, by then donated to the sepulchre, turned out to have a special significance there, which they had previously not known. This feast day was Archbishop John's favorite of all the celebrations of the Most Holy Mother of God. He was tonsured in Yugoslavia in a monastery dedicated to this holy day. On the same feast day, he arrived at his first episcopal see in the Shanghai Cathedral, dedicated to the Mother of God, icon surety of sinners, and years later, on this same feast day, he arrived at his last episcopal see in the San Francisco Cathedral, also of the Mother of God, the joy of all who sorrow. Reader Gleb Podmashensky, January 1968, Gilroy, California. 4. Healing of leg ailments. In the city of Monterey, California, there lived for many years a respectable gentleman, a venerator of Archbishop John, by the name of George Alexandrovich Skaryatin, who worked for Archbishop John for many years. Thanks to Mr. Skaryatin, the house of St. Tikhon of Zadonsk was acquired in San Francisco, in which to house Archbishop John's Shanghai orphans. Also, because of him, the Archbishop John Fund was founded, the mission of which was to raise money for the charitable needs of the bishop. Mr. Skaryatin labored for that fund for many years. During his last years, much of his strength was spent defending the Righteous One, which very likely hastened his premature death. His widow, Olga Mikhailovna, continues his work, sacrificing herself for this cause up to today. For many years she suffered from varicose veins in her legs, until finally she was compelled to be hospitalized. However, there was no relief for her ailment. After 6 weeks, the knots in her veins grew worse, and the doctor insisted on immediate surgery of the vein, which took place on October 18, 1967. They made 20 incisions. She then stayed in the hospital for a whole week. They brought her home completely debilitated and in unbearable pain. In the evening, Father Archimandrite Mitrofan telephoned to find out about her condition, and then told her, "Everything will go away thanks to the prayers of Archbishop John." The next day, earlier in the morning, she could not get up from bed to receive a special delivery letter from Father Mitrofan, in which was enclosed a small piece of cotton saturated with oil from the lamp of Archbishop John's sepulchre. Apparently, the letter had been written right after the Panikhida had been served in the sepulchre at midnight. Here is the complete text of the letter. October 12th, 25th, 1967, 12 at night. Dear Olga Mikhailovna, I was very glad to have talked to you today on the telephone. I'm sending you holy oil from the lampada from the grave of Archbishop John. Open up the paper and every day anoint your leg, the sick spot, where there is no bandage. Cross yourself and say, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, through the prayers of our dear Vladika, heal me from sickness. I firmly believe that thanks to the prayerful intercession of our Vladika, the pain will instantly cease. May the mercy of God be with you. Sincerely loving you in the Lord, your diligent supplicator before God, Father Mitrofan. Having read the letter, Olga Mikhailovna did exactly as Father Mitrofan said. The pain stopped almost at once, and next day she was already on her feet. From that moment, everything was in order. This instantaneous healing amazed her very much. Previously, although she had heard much and had never doubted the miraculous help from the prayers of Archbishop John, she nevertheless had always been very cautious on that subject, Now, however, amazed at this case, she tells everyone about the power of prayerful intercession that comes from faith in Archbishop John. This is how Archbishop John expressed his gratitude to the widow of George Skariatin. It is fitting here to draw an account of Father Archimandrite Mitrophon himself, who for many years lived in close contact with the Righteous One. Moreover, Father Mitrophon's estimation of the ascetic life of Archbishop John, who undoubtedly led the life of a fool for Christ's sake, is very valuable, because Father Mitrophon, from his early childhood in the city of Voronezh in Russia, was in close contact with a genuine fool for Christ's sake, the great righteous Theoktista Mikhailovna, who died in 1936. Having become convinced through his personal experience of her clairvoyance, Father Mitrophon noticed a definite similarity between her and Archbishop John, about which he always testifies as undoubting truth. To others who have never had such a genuine experience in Holy Russia, this might seem an idle exaggeration. One must live with saints in order to judge about saints. Here is what Father Mitrophon wrote to us personally, having titled this note, "From the life of Archbishop John. On the outskirts of Paris, in a large back alley, there was huddled a parish church of our Russian Church abroad, in honor of All Saints of Russia. This back alley was actually a row of garages, or rather cubbyholes for parking cars. In connection with the difficulties in finding a suitable place for a church in the city, it was decided for this purpose to rent to adjacent garages. There was no foundation, no ceiling, no windows, and no ventilation. It was damp and cold there. The back alley had no human inhabitants. Of course, there was no telephone near the church nor in that alley. All this created difficulties for church services. I was never renowned for strong health, and thus I would get so exhausted after serving there that for days I would be absolutely incapacitated and could not fulfill my ecclesiastical obligations. And so it happened that before one major winter feast day I was quite sick. I took all sorts of medicines for my heart, and nothing helped. In such a condition I remained for 4 days. There was such weakness that I had no strength to get out of bed, but I fully realized that one of the major 12 feast days was at hand. In Paris, our Russian church outside of Russia had only one church. The parishioners would come not only from all over Paris, but also from the area around the city. The eve of the feast approached, and I was immovable in bed. Besides this, I was absolutely helpless and alone in a 2-story house. In just a few hours, it would be time for me to take the train to church in order to begin the vigil, and I was deprived of even the possibility of sending someone to hang a notice on the door of the church saying that I was sick and that there would be no church services. I fully realized that the poor parishioners would arrive from far away and would stand in the cold in bewilderment and sorrow, having to wait on this desolate day in front of closed church doors to no avail. I was in terror. What must I do? Suddenly, like a ray of light chases away the darkness, so were my sorrowful thoughts chased away by the light-bearing thought that I had not done the most important thing, that I had not turned for help to Archbishop John. Archbishop John was at that time in America, in San Francisco, where he went to acquire funds for his former flock in order to build a church in Paris. As soon as I remembered about Archbishop John, I immediately felt an inflow of strength. I got out of bed, which I was not able to do earlier. I sat down at the table and began to write a letter to the Archbishop. Dear Vladika and Father, I'm writing a letter to you not with the aim of burdening or saddening you. I have been sick almost the whole week, bedridden, but tomorrow is the feast, and in several hours I must go to church in order to serve vigil. I have absolutely no strength. I firmly believe that as soon as I have this letter written to you, I will be healthy. The mailbox was downstairs on the wall of our house. I quickly got dressed, went downstairs from the 2nd floor, put the letter into the mailbox, and having forgotten about my sickness, as if it had never existed, I briskly went up to my room. I took everything necessary for the church services, and absolutely healthy went to church. The bishop heard, with his boundlessly loving paternal heart, the sorrowful plea of his spiritual son, and, as he had done many times before, hastened to help him, for he had heard across the 7,000 miles which divided us. Having penetrated the boundary of space and time, Archbishop John not only heard me from wherever he was, but at that very moment he also procured God's mercy, and into me was poured strength and help, overcoming all laws of our earthly existence. Archimandrite Mitrophon, as told to Brother Gleb Podmashensky, December 1968, Monterey, California. 5. Healing of a dangerous growth. I, Ivan Nikitich Lutsenko, feel obliged by my conscience to give testimony of how I was healed by the prayers of our beloved Vladika John. For 3 or 4 years I had a growth on the joint of my next to the last finger, about the size of an apricot pit. For a long time I tried to not pay attention to it, although it bothered me a great deal. People sent me to the doctor to have it cut off. I went to the doctor. The doctor, Konstantin Yefimovich Zakharov, said that it would be dangerous to cut it off, since he might hit a nerve, and then I wouldn't be able to bend the finger anymore. But I wanted him to cut off the growth for me. People were already talking about it at work. I have revered Vladika for a long time. About a year after Vladika's death, soon after the sepulchre was opened, and one could go there, I went there one day. I can't say that I went to him especially to ask his help, but just because he was so very dear to me. Coming to the sepulchre, I kissed his mantle, which is on the sarcophagus, placed a candle, kissed the mitre. I stayed there a while. I prayed at Vladika John's, and then somehow forgot about it. In 2 days the finger began to itch. I saw that the growth had begun to soften, and in a week and a half it had entirely disappeared, and I had suffered with it for 3 or 4 years. I absolutely believe that it was Vladika who helped. I had not gone to him in the sepulchre for a long time, and then I went and see what happened. Ivan Lutsenko, February 1969, San Francisco, California. 6. Help in finding a spouse. I want to witness before the believing Orthodox Christians that Archbishop John, although he died, is nevertheless alive to all who pray to him with faith, as if he were alive. During his lifetime I considered him to be a saint, and though I knew little, I believed in his prayers, and used to ask for his prayers in cases of extreme importance in my life. When he died, I at once felt the need to pray to him, and often during church services in the cathedral would come downstairs into his sepulchre and read the Psalter to him, as many used to do. Then many people used to show reverence and cared for him by reading the Psalter aloud, which is an ancient pious custom almost forgotten today, to read the Psalter for the dead. It used to be very touching to see some old lady with a candle in her hand, standing in awe before the Analoi in front of a big old open book, carefully enunciating complicated long words in the Slavonic Psalter, at times totally incomprehensible to anybody, but at least they were understood by the Holy One who heard them and was pleased that a living soul was laboring for him. Many people used to come there and quietly and humbly stand there, patiently waiting their turn to read, listening to the solemn words which mostly referred to the world beyond, from where the Blessed One was listening, then to us here below. Soon after, the new ruling bishop by an ukaz put a stop to that, out of fear that people would use that as an excuse to leave the services which he was serving. Now no one reads there anymore. Once I came there and read for a long time, until there was no one with me anymore. I looked around and saw that no one would be coming. I was all alone with the Blessed One. And then something deeply touched my heart, and I began to weep. I fell on his mantle that covered his dear coffin, and then suddenly I realized that since he is alive with the Lord, and from there he hears us, let him help me in my various needs. And I earnestly began to pray to him for my sister, who wanted very much to get married, but because she had been sick for many years, could not find a man close to her heart. Soon the service upstairs had ended, and they came down to close the sepulchre, and I left. That was Sunday night. The next day in the evening, my sister told me that she had met a young man and felt that they liked each other. Soon after was their wedding, then a child, and now already for several years they have lived happily together. But the remarkable part of it is that their meeting took place exactly the very hour when I prayed to Blessed John about it. Timothy Gorokov, May 1969, Salinas, California. 7. Mystical protection at death, or the Archbishop's Nina. There are some people about whom one knows nothing at all, even though one might see them every day, and when they depart to the other world, they are soon forgotten and their memory fades away. Such a one was Nina Khmeleva, or the Archbishop's Nina, as many in Shanghai called her, since she was always in the cathedral and greatly revered Vladika John. Little is known of her. She was completely alone, having no relatives or close ones at all. She had never gotten married, rented a furnished room in a poor part of town, and during her last years was very sick. One remembers that while still in China, she went to all the services every day, never missing even one. This labor she continued also in San Francisco. At first she went to the old cathedral, and then to the new. One could often see her at the entrance to the cathedral with a receipt book, collecting money for the building of the new cathedral, and it is said that she collected some thousands of dollars in this way. On Thursdays, even when she became sick herself, she continued to take care of retarded children free of charge. In general, her path in life was a bleak one. She was considered a little simple-minded, a blessed one, or something like that. A year before her death, she began to lose weight quickly. Then she said she had cancer, and soon she was in the hospital. The third anniversary of Archbishop John's death drew near in 1969. A week before her death, Nina said that Vladika is coming for me, but no one attached any significance to her words. She suffered much and swelled up terribly, but 3 days before her death she became better and said that some kind of elder was standing behind her in the corner of the room, all in white. 3 times she saw him and asked him whether he had come for her, but he seemed to shake his head in denial. Then came the morning of the day of the commemoration of Vladika John's death. In the sepulchre under the cathedral there was already much movement. The pontifical divine liturgy had begun. At this very time the Archbishop's Nina breathed her last in the hospital, and when her death was reported in the sepulchre, the memorial service was celebrated right after the liturgy, not only for Archbishop John, but also for her. And so it turned out that the first memorial service for her was an Archbishop's service. Truly Vladika John took her to himself, and from that time on, she has been commemorated in the sepulchre together with Archbishop John every year on the anniversary of her death. Reported by T. Blinova. 8. Protector of Travelers. Editor's note. Archbishop John, in fulfillment of his missionary and archpastoral duties, traveled by airplane so often and over such long distances, the final time when his relics were flown from Seattle to San Francisco, where they were entombed, that he has been suggested as the logical candidate for patron saint of travelers by air. As the following account reveals, he may be considered also a protector of other travelers. This account was written by a Russian woman who was close to Vladika in Shanghai, as well as later, and has often asked and received his protection and help. Vladika John used to stop to visit her family whenever traveling by automobile between San Francisco and Seattle, and he baptized her husband and children. On the day of Pascha, we were returning home to Reading. We left San Francisco after being in church, and greeting Archbishop Anthony and our beloved Vladika John, we were hurrying home so as to spend the holy day with my mother, who because of old age and illness could not go to church. The traffic was heavy, and we did not feel like talking, apart from occasionally exchanging our impressions of the splendid service and the singing. My husband was driving the car. Our 7-year-old daughter was playing in the back seat, and I was sitting in front beside my husband. I had slept very little since I had come from the cathedral early in the morning. I decided to doze a little, and evidently I fell asleep. And then I saw that the door seemed to open by my right arm, and Vladika John came out and impatiently called us toward him. The thought came to me, our time has come. At the same time, a shadow passed in front of Vladika. It seemed to be the shadow of a priest. I sat up and said to myself, "May thy holy will be done in everything, O Lord." I opened my eyes and saw that from the left side, from my husband's side, a Volkswagen bus was hurtling toward us. I froze, and then I thought, have we died already, or not yet? For some reason I was reconciled to this and felt no panic, and shameful to admit, I did not even think to ask the Lord to forgive my sins or think to ask his help. The bus flew by us so close that, as the saying goes, if there had been a pancake on one wheel, there would have been a colossal catastrophe. When I looked at my husband, I saw that he had turned very pale, and his hands were shaking, and I knew that we were alive. I sat back again, and thanked the Lord for the miraculous deliverance from catastrophe, and here my thoughts turned to the vision of Vladika. What did it mean? Vladika had called us toward him as if with impatience, as if it were a matter of life or death. But it was I who had seen Vladika, and my husband was driving the car. I had said nothing to him, had not warned him. There had been no time. What did all this mean? At this time my husband saw that I wasn't sleeping and told me of our narrow escape. I told him that I knew, and that I hadn't been sleeping. Vladika John woke me up. He warned me, and I told him what I had seen. My husband replied, "But why didn't Vladika warn me? Why didn't I see him, and why didn't you tell me anything?" I reflected. True, I had said nothing to him, but how could Vladika have appeared to my husband? After all, he was driving the car. Besides, I believe that Vladika knows my husband better than anyone else, since he baptized him. I believe that Vladika inspired him to turn toward the right side before the oncoming bus began to come toward us. I had seen the oncoming bus, and at that moment, our car was already at the extreme right side of the road. There was no sudden movement to the right, and our car was going straight ahead. Whereas, if one car would try to turn in an emergency to avoid a collision, the rear of the car might be closer to the oncoming car. Vladika had warned us both. I looked at my husband and said, "How do you know that you were not warned?" He didn't argue with me. I think he also believes that Vladika had helped us on that marvelous day of Pascha. Valentina Harvey, Pascha 1972, Redding, California. 9. Deliverance from cancer. About Vladika John, I know only what I have read in your magazine. Last year, after the 20th of October, my mother was in the hospital with a severe pain in the stomach. I was very upset, fearing that she might have cancer. And then in the night before the doctor was to tell me the results of the tests, I saw a dream. Many people were standing around a large white church with Russian domes. An old man in white came out of the church with a staff and came across the street straight up to my mother and me. When he came up to us, I recognized from his photograph that it was Vladika John. He blessed Mother and me, and I immediately woke up. I was not upset anymore about Mother. As it turned out, she had an ulcer which quickly healed. Now I think often about Vladika. Tamara Hurt, July 25, 1975, Sarnia, Ontario, Canada. Editor's note: in the articles which Bishop Sava published in Orthodox Russia concerning Archbishop John, there are a number of dreams similar to this one, and Bishop Sava makes a significant observation after describing one. One may consider this dream as true, because St. Barsanuphius the Great writes that if one sees the cross in a dream, this is a sign that the dream is from God, since Satan cannot represent the cross. Of course, other dreams also may be from God, but we do not have such a sure indication that such a dream is from God as we do if we see the sign of the cross in it. And if the dream is from God, one must be careful, says St. Barsanuphius, not to interpret it incorrectly, for here Satan can deceive us. Orthodox Russia, 1967, number 3. That Vladika John should make the sign of the cross while blessing in this dream, and with it give peace of mind, indicates that this dream also was from God, and was Vladika's grace-given visitation to one who venerates him. 10. Preservation from a car accident. The portraits of Blessed Archbishop John Maximovitch arrived just at the time when we were leaving for Europe. Being somewhat suspicious of how safe our airplanes, buses, cars, and trains are, and trusting in the help of well-traveled Blessed John Maximovitch, we were very thankful that we could take his portrait with us on all our journeys. Actually, our friend M tells us that he was saved from a car accident by a miracle worked by Blessed Archbishop John. M had been driving in his car at night time at considerable speed when an enormous deer appeared at the side of the road and started dashing towards his car, but before the beast could reach the automobile, it was suddenly stopped, and at the same time M felt very distinctly the presence of Blessed John Maximovitch. Michael Nedelsky, South Dakota, January 12, 25, 1974. 11. Hope for departed non-Orthodox. Editor's note: the following incident is from an American convert whose mother died without becoming Orthodox. He was in sorrow and uncertain how to pray for her when he received this answer from Vladika John, when he also interpreted as a sign that we should be missionaries and show love and concern for the non-Orthodox around us. I was reading in the afternoon from the Orthodox Word in May-June 1974. First I looked at the photo of Vladika John's sepulchre. As I did, I read again the Troparion for him, and on finishing was moved to kiss his sepulchre, and said to him how sorry I was that I had not visited it more often in San Francisco when I had been there. I then glanced at a picture of my mother and asked him once again to pray for her, and I felt sure that he was praying for her. Then my eyes began to become heavy, and they closed, and I entered into a kind of reverie, during which I saw my mother with her apron on, talking much as she did in the last years of her life. Then suddenly I sensed that Vladika was praying for her. I then saw her again, but this time down on her knees, crying and saying how sorry she was for her sins. She cried so loudly and so bitterly that I could almost hear her actual voice in the room. I was impressed to join Vladika in prayer and not to open my eyes. I began to pray simply but fervently for God to have mercy on her, and I was conscious of Vladika's presence very strongly, though I did not see him as I did my mother. She continued to cry with great sorrow and finally disappeared. Soon I saw Vladika John, but only from the back. I could not see his face, only the veil of his kamilavka and the side of his beard, then the top of his episcopal staff and the sleeve of his rason. He began to slowly walk away, and I noticed clearly that he wore a plain black monk's mantle rather than an episcopal one. He then slowly exited with dignity, and I never saw his face, but I was sure it was he. I then opened my eyes, arose, and again recited his Troparion aloud, facing east, and kissed the photo of his sepulchre. I do not know the full meaning of what I experienced. One thing I note is that Vladika said nothing and made no promises. I was simply assured of his prayers and of the need of my own and others. I also note that he wore a monk's mantle and staff rather than episcopal mantle and staff. This would indicate to me that he did what he did in a private capacity rather than as a bishop in official capacity, which would mean that he affirms the Church's prohibition of offering public prayers for departed non-Orthodox, but also affirms the teaching that private prayers for them are of great value and should be encouraged. Joseph McKean, Youngstown, Ohio, September 6, 1974. 12. Reminder to pray for the dead. Here is something I have not yet related to you, but about the deeds of saints one must inform the whole world. Several years ago, when I was in great sorrow, the late Vladika John Maximovitch appeared to me in a dream. I saw in the middle of our church a coffin, and in it Vladika John lying in his mantle. Vladika crossed himself, got up, and said to me, "Pray for the slave of God Basil, who had died several years before, and for someone whose name I could not make out, but later I figured out that this was our rumored Eugene, who had died." Alexander Pernitz, San Francisco, California, December 14, 1975.